In this episode of the ADF Engineering Podcast, Mark Curtis from ADF Engineering talks with Brandon Lawlor, president of CC&E. Brandon brings over 22 years of experience in pre-construction planning and cost estimating across a wide range of industrial projects. Brandon will break down how estimates are developed, when they should be prepared, how contingency is defined and applied, and what owners need to understand to better evaluate and negotiate construction costs. With that, let's get started.
Good morning, Brandon, and thank you for taking the opportunity to share with us a little bit about cost estimating today. I wanted to thank you for, over the last 6 years, I think we've been working together, and you've supported me in many aspects of cost estimating. I know that I've learned a lot from you over the years. I was hoping maybe before we get started today, you could kind of give a little background on yourself, kind of how you got into cost estimating, and a little bit about CC&E.
Terrific. Well, good morning, Mark. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today. It's been 6 years, which it's kind of flown by. You know, the COVID years make things go a little bit quicker, I guess. So we'll start with CC&E. So CC&E is construction consulting and estimating. So it's a company that my wife and I actually founded together. So we are Ohio Edge certified small business. And we started the company about almost a year and a half ago, trying to figure out a better way to do what I was doing for a previous employer and taking the people that I worked with. And so what we did is we started CC&E, and we took basically the entire team that I was working with at my previous employer and started this company. So we now have 18 employees, 10 of which are cost estimators and work fully in the cost estimating services that we do. How I got here, I kind of took a roundabout way to get to being an estimator. I actually went to college for the idea of, hey, I'm going to be in construction management. So I always thought, hey, I want to be in construction some way, shape, or form. When I ended up applying for colleges, I looked specifically for that. But then I did a kind of a 180 and changed and said, guess what? I'm going to go for accounting and finance. And so that's what I actually have. My degree is in finance. And I was an accountant for a number of years prior to converting over into the construction industry. And I kind of learned the trades, learned construction while doing it. Had an opportunity to go work for a company and help them with their accounting, and then kind of dabbled in estimating. And then ultimately I switched from accounting to full-time estimating, and through the years just kind of grew. And it's been a great process. I've really liked the numbers make sense to me because of my financial background, and then learning construction. My dad was in the industry, so it's kind of in the blood that to be in construction in some way, shape, or form. And it's been a great opportunity. And I've worked with some terrific people, clients like yourself and other collaborators, and then our internal team. I think our company is only as strong as the staff that we have and the team that we have, and that's really what makes, I think, us special and us be able to do what we do.
Well, great background, and I probably can't say it enough. It's just been a real pleasure, kind of getting a little bit of what your knowledge and helping us out with our customers. It's been wonderful. So I do have some questions that I want to ask you, and just kind of talk through kind of how these things are, right? So my first question is why are cost estimates important to our customers?
So that's a good question. We hear that a lot is, do I need a cost estimate, or can't my, designer or design firm do the cost estimate for us? And what we say is cost estimates are important because it's a checks and balances system. So you develop a cost estimate based off of a set of documents that you have at a given time in the project. And we feel that the cost estimates allow owners to make informed decisions. We feel it gives them an accurate look at what's going to be coming at them whenever they're ready to bid. And that's what our whole process is meant to do, is to really give a better idea of, are they on budget or are we not? Maybe you can add some scope, or maybe we need to remove some scope. And that's where the estimate really allows those informed decisions to come into play. And it's something that we feel is beneficial for all owners, whether you have a CM on board, which is a construction manager, or whether you're going to do it as a general contractor bid. We think having an independent estimate, the way that we do it, provides value because it provides clarity. It also is that checks and balances to make sure that the CM's number is as accurate as it should be. And there's no hidden scope or doubled up scope. It's really making sure that we provide that clarity to the process.
Do you think it removes risk for our clients? Do you think that when they have a good cost estimate, does it kind of help them understand the stage gate process that they're going through and be able to fund it, and then use that information with their prospective contractor?
Yeah, I think it does, because the estimates that we provide, they really are a scoping document that allows any owner to review that with their contractor to see if they have that right scope. And then it allows them to understand what's your level of accuracy that you're at for, depending where we are in the process. So whether we're early in the phase, or at more of a feasibility, or if we're ready to issue for construction, the level of accuracy of an estimate really helps an owner to understand where are they at and how do they get to the ultimate goal of a completed and constructed project on time and on budget. And that's what we are trying to help them with. The time aspect of it, we have a little bit of impact, but not a lot. But the budget side, we can really help them to fine tune, because we can create safety valves. Maybe there's an alter that needs to be created, or maybe there's a scope item that isn't really necessary at this time and can be phased in later. And we can help come up with some of those solutions so they can make an informed decision.
No, that's great. And I've seen that in practice. That's really apropos. The other question I had for you that's kind of been on my mind is I know that we've worked through different phases of the projects. I know we've gone through FEL1, FEL2, FEL3, and other phases that's been defined by our customers. What are the different types of estimates, and when do you do them?
Yeah, so there are various types of estimates, from a feasibility study or conceptual level estimate to a very detailed design level cost estimate. And we find that our team works about 95% of the work that we do are projects that we're involved with. We end up doing a cost estimate at concept. Because it's that idea moment, or it's close to that idea moment, where you really can put the foundation in, and you really can help to drive what the scope of the project is and what direction it's moving in. And that's where we find the most value, because there's a lot of decisions that are made early on in a project that are made without a lot of detail, because obviously your team, for instance, hasn't had a chance to get into the engineering, or hasn't had a chance to really design the process. And so that's where that concept estimate is. We're trying to pull as much information into it as we can and provide those line items of detail that give some value to the client to say, oh, I don't need this scope now, or maybe I do. And then when we get on the a little bit further into design, we do a detailed design estimate. Maybe it's 50% design level, and that might have a level of accuracy to it that's in that 20 to 30% accuracy range, but that is based off of more detailed drawings that puts more scope items into it, and allows us to provide a little bit more clarity as to what are the scope items in the specific divisions, and then price those up. And it gives the owner just that much more clarity of what they want. And then the final one really is that, issue for construction, or just before issue for construction, where we're going to do probably a plus or minus 10% level accuracy. And that is the final number that the owner would ultimately take to their board or their executive committee and say, hey, this is what the estimate is coming back at. This is where we believe the bidders are going to come in on bid day, or close in within this range. And they can make that informed decision of a go, no go on a bid opportunity. So that's where we think, the evolution of the cost estimate is, very little information at the very early stages, with a high level of contingency, a high level of accuracy, or lower level of accuracy. And then it trends itself to, lower contingency and a high level of accuracy.
Is there like a standard process for different classes of estimates, or ranges for the estimates?
Yeah, so we find that we follow a lot of what AACE, so it's American Association of Cost Estimators, and we find that they have a classification system, class 1, class 2, class 3 type estimates, and those classifications have accuracy ranges to them that they prescribe to. And it's based off of the amount of detail that's in the design, as well as the amount of detail that goes into a cost estimate, and it's that accuracy transcript or prescription. We see that most of our projects start off in that 30 to 40% accuracy range, and that would be a high-level class 1 estimate. Then you get down to a class 2 where that range tightens up a little bit, might get to a plus or minus 20% accuracy, and then that class 3, which you really aren't going to be into a class 3 level estimate until you are very close to an issue for construction, and that would get you to, say, a plus or minus 10%. We find that in our industry, plus or minus 10% is really where we would recommend an owner kind of stay at that issue for construction. Could you get less? And our goal as a company is always to be better than plus or minus 10%. Our goal as a company is to be plus or minus 5. But sometimes the reality of getting to a plus or minus 5 in a cost estimate is a challenge because there's still design that's happening or there's still some unknowns in a project. And that's where we always recommend, hey, plus or minus 10% really is that kind of that gold standard before you go out to construction to say, hey, we're in that ballpark. Everything seems to look pretty good.
As one of the things I noted too, and kind of us working together, is that sometimes we'll do this in phases, but we've seemed to find with certain customers that it's really good to go through all the phases and make sure that that we're working with our customers in the concept to start with that, but then also to keep the estimate kind of up to date throughout the process as more information is learned. Estimating becomes better as more design is done. Estimating comes better, and I think at the end of that, that client has a really good sense of what they can expect to spend on CapEx. Would you agree?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's understanding how a process needs to be implemented triggers those phases as well. And maybe there's a different level of cost estimate that can happen on an independent phase or where the phase may be. And I think that provides a greater value to the client to really understand their process, understand how it's going to be delivered. Ultimately, all of the cost estimates are based on how is the project going to be constructed. And that's why we really take a lot of time to understand that. And you and I have worked on projects in the relatively recent past, where we had to look at multiple buildings, multiple facilities within a larger compound, and how do we phase it so therefore the work can be done in a strategic manner that allows an owner to still operate their facility, but yet gives them the ability to expand. And that's where that phasing and understanding how does the estimate align to the scope that's going to be implemented and the best process for an owner to still maintain the operational facilities.
Yeah, it's so important, and I know that was really valued by that customer. So one of the biggest things that I get the most questions about, or I get in conversations with, both in customers and internal to our engineering company, is how do you handle contingency in an estimate, and what's kind of the importance of that? And I'll do it in my layman's speak. Is you have owner contingency, you have contingency on equipment purchase. Can you kind of illustrate so that any one of our customers that may be looking at this really understands the importance of contingency and then how you arrive at it in your estimates?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and share screen here. And I have a slide that we put together for our customers that kind of gives them an indication of the types of contingencies. But before I share it, so we see that there are 3 types of contingencies in a project that we recommend to be carried. First is a design or estimating contingency. Then the second is, we'll call it a change order / owner contingency. And then the third is an escalation or market conditions contingency. So those contingencies allow for the owner to be protected as best as possible, but also to make sure that the scope is covered that we know is going to evolve over time. So let me get this up here on screen, and we can share that and walk through this.
That sounds good. Thank you, Brandon.
Give me 1 second. I apologize for the delay.
As you pull that up, maybe you can also kind of explain when you get into that? We always talk, or at least the language you and I used was above the line and below the line costs. And I have a tendency to use that in talking with customers too. After you go through the contingency, maybe you can kind of explain what we mean when we say that.
Yeah. So there are two types of we would call regular contingencies, and those are, everyone knows those because they usually fall into projects. And then our third bucket is that escalation. So estimating contingency or design contingency. So this is really to understand where we are in the process, where we are in the design, and at a concept level of estimating, we're going to have a higher level of contingency because your team hasn't had enough time to put pen to paper yet and really put together the full engineering or the scope package. So what we do is we put in all the line items that we can think of into the estimate, and we try to complete the picture as best as we can. And then we put a contingency onto it that is a recommendation. And at a concept level, we can see contingencies 15, 20, 25% for this design. And that's all based on the complexity of the process and the complexity of the future build. And then that design contingency, though, as the design evolves, gets lower, it shrinks. It should always be shrinking as you get further into design because you know more. So we've inserted more line items in the detailed cost estimate, so therefore the contingency can come down. The second form of contingency is an owner's contingency, or what we call it as an owner's change order contingency, because you're really not spending the owner contingency during design. So that's really a fixed number. It should not really change. It should be established pretty early on, whether an owner has, whether a large corporation that has a program that states we have a certain percentage that we carry in every project and they don't deviate, or we can recommend a percentage that an owner should carry based off of the complexity as well too. But what we say is let's establish that at that feasibility and concept level phase. And then once that's there, that percentage stays the same throughout the entire design phase. And it's ultimately to protect an owner for when they go to bid or go to construction. And as we all know, once you start to see something put in place, you start to realize maybe it didn't work quite the way that you thought it would, or maybe you wanted, maybe I want a little bit different change to my process because I need to pick the rate of the process up. And so that's what that contingency is really meant for. It's meant for, change of process, change of scope. It's meant for unforeseens, items that you just don't see while we're doing an estimate or doing the design until you put a shovel in the ground or until you break through a wall on a facility. And that's where that really covers it from an owner standpoint. And then the final contingency, which we always call as a contingency, is escalation. And this is where our market analysis comes into play. And that escalation is where is the market at today? And where do we think the costs are going over the life of the project? We escalate every project to a midpoint of construction. So we want to make sure mid-spend, midpoint of construction, that contractor that's doing that work is going to have to cover all the costs of labor and material and what might change over the duration of the construction. And then any unforeseens that will happen within those trades as well too. So we want to make sure that there's an escalation value that takes into account what's happening in the region. And this one specifically is based off of ENR, and then we merge their data with our own data to really come up with a regional approach. And we want to see where do we think it's going to be, and we put that contingency percentage in there, or that escalation percentage in there on a per year basis. So if a project is going to take multi-years to design and then multi-years to construct, we are going to cover a 2 or 3 year escalation in the project. Because it's a real cost. It's not a hidden cost. It's not something that it just is in the unit prices, because the unit prices that we're going to provide and any contractor we're going to provide are based off today. And we want to make sure that that's accounted for the future and the unknowns. And so we always recommend a percentage, and that's why our team tracks what's happening in the market very closely. So we know what's happening in the regions across the country, and we know how to react and recommend a percentage. As you see on the graph here, which obviously is always very, very small on a tiny screen, it shows that COVID bump that everyone saw. And we're 5 years removed from COVID, as we all like to say, but the pricing's never really come back. But we've seen some relaxation to the markets over the last 6 to 9 months. And what we want to do is predict those. Nobody has a crystal ball. I wish I did, but we want to be able to accurately project where we think they'll be. And then that gives us the ability to recommend to our owners, how do you proceed? market timing, for one instance, is it a good time to go out to bid, or is it not a good time to go out to bid? And we can put that recommendation into our estimate that states, hey, right now we're seeing the market is exploding, so why are you going out to bid? Or, hey, right now what we've seen, and especially here in the Ohio market, so you being down in the Cincinnati market, us being in the Cleveland market, we're seeing a very good bidders market right now. So if projects are able to go out to bid, we're actually seeing bidders that are hungry, and we're seeing pricing that's reflecting that. So that's a recommendation that we can tell owners. If you have a project that's close to shovel ready, we can get it out the door, and we can get it for probably a better number than we could have, say, 6 months ago. And we don't know what the future holds. So is there any way to push as quick as we possibly can to get it out on the streets?
No, I really appreciate that you mentioned the COVID years, because you and I had the opportunity to work on projects that were very large during that time, and your ability to get the data and then to share that really helped the clients making decisions on ordering early and things like that. So I think that's really important. And I also noticed that during that time we had to kind of change. You guys really were you were needed to really elevate your game, so to speak, because you were like, it was almost daily that you were getting information on changes. So that was very valuable. One of the questions I had just after you were talking about that is, we've dealt with customers that we have put a contingency in there, and then they wanted to discuss with you the negotiation of what that contingency rate should be. So my big question there is, what's the pitfalls or risks when a customer is not including enough contingency? Kind of what plays out for them?
Yeah, I think so. If there's not enough contingency in there, then the owner, I think the conversation needs to be, then we should create allowances in the project, which are for scope items. But I think you're trying to pinch pennies by cutting a contingency line item that's ultimately there to protect them. It's there to protect every owner. And it's there because, you and I have been doing this for a long time. We've experienced that design is going to evolve and projects evolve, and that's where this contingency really is that protection element. And there is a fine line. You don't want to have too much contingency, because if you have too much contingency, now all of a sudden you've made a project that isn't affordable for a client. So the goal is to understand the complexity of the process, understand the complexity of the general construction activities, and then where are we at in the design process? If you can merge all those together and come up with some ideas of, hey, we're comfortable at a range that may be between 10 and 12% or 12 and 15%. And then it's going back with the owner and it's having that open communication. So that's where the collaboration process that is so critical to the design and the estimating process is. We need to be able to talk to one another and have that open communication. We would recommend a 15% contingency. The owner may come back and say, well, we'd really like to see this closer to, say, 8 or 10. Well, 8 or 10 is great, and possibly you could do there, but there's some of these factors that are unknowns, and I think that's where maybe we can track some of those risk matrix line items. We don't know these 5 things, and that's why we are recommending a higher level of contingency. On that same project that you and I referred to a little while ago that had multiple phases to it, we did that. We did a risk register that basically allowed the owner to understand these are the 12 to 15 items that are defined, but they're very loosely defined, and they might change greatly over the course of the next couple months. And we put together that risk register that allowed us to kind of work up what level of contingency we thought we needed based off of that. And I think that was very well received by the owner. I think the owner appreciated that, hey, you took the due diligence to come up with that, and it ultimately allowed for a higher level contingency than the owner wanted, because they understood, hey, there's these 12 to 15 items that are still out there that we need to understand.
No, and I completely agree with you. When I think about it in my head, I think about, from an engineering perspective, we have known knowns. So these are things that we know what it is. We have it addressed. It's something that's not too much risk because it's a known known. Then we know that we have unknowns. So we have known unknowns, which are things that you can't get enough information on until maybe later. So that's where a contingency really plays in, is in the known unknowns, because you got to do it, but you may not have the scope of it quite defined. And then I think the biggest part in it is the unknown unknowns, which is, on any project, you're going to discover something that is an unknown completely. You didn't plan for it. You didn't know it was coming. And so I've seen over the years with your help is that having that contingency there is really level sets the expectations, all the stakeholders, so that you don't um, overpromise and underdeliver, right? It lets the boards know, the stakeholder boards lets them know what to expect, and it lets them to know it at each stage. So I think that's a great example of the use of contingency. The
Yeah.
one of the other,
If I could, Mark, real quick. So I completely agree with you, and it kind of gave me an idea of something as you were saying that of, our goal as a cost estimator isn't to be the low bidder, right? So, and I think that goes to that contingency claim. So we could lower the contingency as tight as possible. But then at the end of the day, if our estimate comes back and we're the low bidder and they get other bids and our number would be number 1 out of 5 bids, that doesn't do the owner or it doesn't do the project team any good to be that. So our goal is to put together an estimate that can be beat in a moderate fashion. So if you get 5 bidders, our goal is to be 2 or 3. That's where we would like to fall in that line. And I think that contingency plays a critical role into it to make sure that we're able to get there. So an owner can achieve a project that they can afford and not all of a sudden get surprised on bid day.
and I completely agree. Another question I had, and this may be a little bit of a pivot, but how do you collect the data and then how do you share it in a meaningful way? Because I've seen estimates done differently. I really like the way that you have done things and the way you explain it to our customers when we do that. If it's possible, maybe you can share kind of how that works, or just talk through kind of how do you collect the data? What makes you valuable to know what the data is? And then how do you share it with the customer so that they can use it?
Yeah, so I can share an estimate template or at least a summary sheet that gives some indications of some of those line items to you. I'll have to redact some of the information, but it'll be a small project that we worked on that I can share, kind of talk through that. But first I'll talk about our data. So the way that we run our data is we're a third-party estimator, so we don't rely on subcontractors. So we don't call subs to get numbers. We will call vendors, we will call material suppliers, and we will get their pricing for what their equipment and their material costs are. But then we do everything in-house because we're trying to be impartial. We don't want to affect the market or taint the market in any way by giving a sub the thought that they have a leg up on anybody else. And we're very good at that. We're very good at predicting what's happening in the market and taking material pricing that we receive from vendors and adding the labor to do that. So we have a database that we've been tracking for my entire career. It's 25 years worth of data, and it's a couple thousand line items in a document that we use that allows us to search and pull specific line items, and we're constantly updating it. So our team, when we get a vendor quote, we're updating that database. So it allows us to say, hey, of this piece of equipment was X before, we just got an updated vendor quote for that same piece of equipment. And in this region, this is what that cost is. And we try to track everything on a regional approach. Actually, I was just talking with somebody in the office here this morning that said, hey, how do you look at it from different markets? Because, you may buy a generator here in Ohio, but in Florida or California, that same generator might be a little bit different cost structure. And that's where we have to take that into account. And that's where our database does that, allows us to really put into regional factors, regional cost differences to track that. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'll share screen with at least our summary sheet to give an idea of kind of how it looks like. And it's a very easily communicated summary sheet. We find it to be the most simplistic form of a summary sheet, which I think is beneficial to an owner. And the way that we do it is we break it down into different buckets, different cost centers within a summary sheet. So we have that top sector, which shows divisions 1 through 35. Those are your trades costs. And we always want to make sure that the trades costs are very clearly indicated. This one just happens to be a project that didn't happen to have any process on it, this sample. So those divisions are actually have no scope in them. But you would see the process divisions in here as well too. And that comes to a subtotal of trades work. So that is, what are the subcontractors that are going to be bidding a project? What are their cost structures going to be? Then we get to our contingencies. And this is where we would start off with a design contingency. An escalation would be added in here. And then any permitting that would be required. And so that would get us to a subtotal of trades work. And then below that is our contractor markups. So this would be, a GC markup that we saw for this specific project in this specific location. And that gets us to our total probable construction cost. And then below that is our soft costs, as you noted, project cost adders. That would be engineering fees. That would be a change order or an owner's contingency. That would be any sort of construction management fees. This is where your construction administration services would be here as well. This would be automation costs would be down in this sector as well. So we try to understand what's happening with those project soft costs that are owner direct costs. And then that gets us to a total probable project cost at the very bottom. And it's a good simplistic way to show our clients how do you look at this from a summary sheet. And then each one of these divisions has a page behind it with details on it. And that page can range from 2 or 3 line items, because there may be very little scope to, on some of the project, Mark, you and I have worked on, we've had some of these divisional elements that have been 7 to 10 pages of detail, because there's just so many line items that go into it. So we use a format that we have multiple, web-based tools that we use. We also have our own format that we've designed that we use. So we have a very customizable format that allows us to meet the needs of really all of our clients.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed this, coming from the engineering side, the pure engineering, consulting engineering side. I really enjoyed being able to learn from you on this. And when I think about an estimate, this is kind of what always I get pictured in my mind. I get the divisions, and then the details that support that division of work, and then the below the line cost. One of the things that I think is interesting, and then I want you to just qualify it for me. A lot of times we work across the United States, like you said, in Canada, and labor costs can be different. But you guys have a way of considering that and putting it into the estimate based on the area that you're working.
Yes. So that's what we try. We always look at what's happening in each market that we're working in. And so we will pull labor rates for those specific markets. We just completed a project overseas in Europe, and we had to pull what the labor markets were from there. And so what we do is we put in what is a labor rate, and then we build it up. So we don't just say, if it's open shop or prevailing wage, this is what the rate is. We build it up because we add in a supervision line item. We add other things of that nature, so we can come up to a built up full in labor rate. And then in addition to that, we'll look at the market factors and what do we think the overhead and profit for subcontractors should be in that specific market. And we add that into the sheets as well. So you'll see a material markup, labor markup, and then a labor rate. And we look at those on each individual region that we're working in. So if we have a project in California, we're going to pull the labor rates from California, because the labor rates in Los Angeles are significantly more expensive than they are here in Cleveland or in Cincinnati. Same with New York City. If you're working in New York City or greater New York, their labor rates are higher than ours. And so we need to make sure that we're tracking that in every region that we're at. So therefore, those costs are accounted, because labor is different across our country, and we want to make sure it's evenly or distributed properly in our estimates, because there's factors that people will look at to say, hey, we didn't expect that the labor to be only 40% of this project. We thought the labor was going to be more expensive because it's a complex project. And we can run that analysis to say, hey, your labor actually is 60% of the project, and here's the reasons why. And that, I think, provides some clarity to an owner to say, oh, okay, we expected that the labor cost would be more because it's a hard project to get into. It's not easy to put a piece of pipe into a certain location, things of that nature.
So I think that's really important. What about different industries? Do you see that you have to estimate your below the line cost if you're doing a pharma injectable versus a grain bin? Right? Is there costs below the line costs that are different for different industries?
There are, because indirects will come into play different in every industry. So a pharma, for instance, will have a little bit different industry than, say, a material processing facility. So looking at that to say is maybe it's a soy processing facility or it's an oil refinery. Those level of indirects in those facilities are going to be significantly higher than they would be in say a pharmaceutical. And we want to make sure that we're tracking those. Not to say that the pharmaceutical is going to be any cheaper, but their indirect costs maybe aren't quite any cheaper. And so that's where we need to look at those soft costs and really understand what are those temporary utilities, temporary conditions that are going to go into play in each one of those scenarios, and what are their requirements from, a fire watch or a hot work requirement on that site that maybe isn't on another site. And we have to take all that into account to make sure that we have the supervision, the staffing, even the owner's staff. What is their owner engineering cost going to be? And we want to make sure that those go into those soft costs as well too, because some industries, they have a large cost of owner engineering and some costs they don't, or some owners don't capitalize the cost of engineering of their own staff and some do. And that's where we want to make sure in those specific industries and those specific clients that the numbers are tracked appropriately.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important. And I believe that on the, some of the projects that we worked on in the past, as engineering has progressed and we get at the end of it and you're doing the cost estimate, we know more about maybe equipment that's on order and maybe it's being shipped from overseas and we may have to store it. And I think that it's important because of those things that we're actually, continuing with the estimate, because at the end, when we know those things are going to be late or something like that, you're also working the schedule. You're using the schedule knowledge in order to make your estimate better.
Yes, that's 100% correct. Understanding where materials are coming from, where they're being sourced from, if there's going to be a delay or if there's a long lead item. These are some of the items that we want to talk about and have conversations about. And you mentioned an item that just came up this year. I mean, it's new to all of us, and it's tariffs. We've always had, some sort of an import-export cost, but what we're seeing now is projects that are getting charged more for the tariffs that are in place. And so those have to be accounted for as well, too, in the estimate, because if something's coming in from overseas, there could be a 20% tariff on some of those or even higher, and we want to make sure that those are accounted for. Or maybe the client decides, well, we can't afford to pay that tariff. Then we can help to source maybe a material that's more locally found here in the States. And so that's part of our process to really help that owner understanding that whole process and how those costs are going to impact.
That's great, Brandon. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge on this with me. I've exhausted my questions that I had, but I will leave it open if there's any kind of closing comments or things that maybe we didn't cover that you want people that would see this to know.
Yeah, I think it's the process of a cost estimate is one that is we're not a primary subcontractor or subconsultant. We understand that, but we find that it provides a lot of value and clarity to an owner, and ultimately the goal is to be a collaborative part of the design process, really to provide the protection that we can do. So we're there to protect that owner's goal and their vision from a budgetary and financial standpoint. And I think working with collaborators like yourself, Mark, and our other clients that understand the value of a cost estimate really helps to provide that aha moment and that safety net for a project. So ultimately, we take great care in what we do. We take great care in working for the clients that, like yourselves, that we work for on a regular basis, because our goal is to make you and your owner look as good as possible to their executive team, to their industry in general, to understanding that, hey, we have a project that is coming out to bid, and we want that thing to bid as accurately as it possibly can. So it's something that we don't take lightly. We're very proud of what we do, and we are students of what we do. So we are not only feel that we're the experts in our field, but we're constantly learning in our field to understand how is it changing and how is it evolving.
Thank you so much, Brandon, for taking the time today. Well, that concludes everything I want to discuss.
Today's episode featured Brandon Lawlor from CC&E, where we explored why accurate cost estimating is essential across every phase of an engineering and construction project. We discussed how estimates are developed, how contingency should be planned, and how reliable numbers help teams reduce risk and drive successful outcomes. If you need quality estimating support on your project, reach out to Mark Curtis at mcurtis, C-U-R-T-I-S, at adfengineering.com to schedule a time to talk. If you found today's conversation valuable, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to be notified of future episodes.